Let me put this in words you might understand. Mr. President, off.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. One of those freeze-frame record scratch moments. You're probably wondering how we got here, as the old saying goes, when those are the first words from the mouth of a Danish representative to the European Parliament, a far-right one at that. Denmark, remember, lost more soldiers per capita in Afghanistan than the nation responsible for invoking Article 5 as part of that conflict in the first place. The nation it jumped to defend. The nation now threatening the sovereignty of its territory in Greenland. Yes, us, the United States of America. As we speak, our NATO allies who stood with us shoulder to shoulder in our hour of crisis and tragedy and need are grappling with hypotheticals, scenarios they never dreamed of in their darkest nightmares. Things they never thought they'd be forced to address and plan for. Sadly, they have that in common with American military leadership. As Tom Nichols writes in The Atlantic today, quote, American officers know what Trump is planning. The world knows it because Trump won't stop saying it. And their minds will rebel at directives to take everything they've prepared to do for years and apply it backwards against the people they have trained to work with and protect. The president, in other words, will be ordering them to do something they have been trained never to do. Should Donald Trump pursue this scheme of conquest, the military's training will have to be shattered and reassembled into a destructive version of itself, as if doctors were asked to take life-saving medicines, reconstitute them as poisonous isomers, and then administer them to patients. A former senior NATO and Pentagon official tells MS Now this, quote, any move touching Danish territory would immediately be framed as an alliance matter, pushing coordination through NATO, with the EU reinforcing the political and economic dimensions. And so, our revered and beloved servicemen and women up and down the chain of command may soon be forced to reckon with what would be an historic betrayal of our very closest allies and friends, all in service of what Donald Trump describes as his own psychological need. Quote, that is where we start the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends, the aforementioned staff writer at The Atlantic, a contributor to The Atlantic Daily Newsletter. Tom Nichols is here. He's a professor emeritus of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College, where he taught for more than 2 decades. Also joining us, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He served as the commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe. Tom, I think you flesh out in really disturbing ways what people who have covered this and understand to be the case. We would be at war with our allies, but you describe what that means for the men and women of the military. And I'm going to ask both of you to take me through what that means and what that looks like. But Tom, you write about it, so tell me more.
They would have to basically decide that everything that they've done was pointed in the wrong direction. That after years of training with our allies, with the Danes, to fight against foreign threats, outside threats to Europe, to Denmark, to the North Atlantic community, of which we are all a part, to the United States, that we would have to stop all of that, turn around, and literally do everything backwards and say, now the Danes are the enemy. We have to invade their territory in the way that we once assumed someone else would do that. And I think, it's a shocking level of betrayal that we're asking our men and women in uniform to do. And, while it's an honor to be here with Mark, I'm just stunned at the silence of so many generals and admirals, active duty and retired, who know this and who know it better than anyone about what a kind of, mental and emotional reversal this would be for people that have trained never to do the thing that they're going to be ordered to do.
General Hertling.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Tom said, is that when you're talking about Europe, which I spent about a third of my career in Europe and working with allies across the board, there are 49 different countries in Europe. 31 of them are part of the NATO alliance with us and Canada, so that's 32. And what I'd say is, my last year in command in 2013, Nicole, we did 435 multinational exercises of different types. So sometimes we would go with 5 countries, sometimes we would go with 10, sometimes it was just a one-on-one with another country. So Tom is exactly right. We have developed friendships, training, and exercised with these individual nations, with their armies. We know their governments. We know both their strengths and some of their weaknesses. But this is just insane from the standpoint of what you're asking the military to potentially do against allied nations that are part of a security alliance that dates back to 1947. And I'd add to that, one of the factors in that security alliance is the fact that President Truman was one of the instigators of NATO. He signed the original document. And then a couple of months later, the Senate approved it by a vote of something like 86-13. So when you're talking about what the military might be asked to do, it would not only violate international law, invading another country, the sovereignty of another country, it would also violate domestic law. And this would be something that all military officers who swear the oath to the Constitution would have to question and would have to get legal advice on. But truthfully, I'll tell you, I wouldn't need any legal advice. I would say it's illegal to violate the oath and attack an alliance nation unless some things have changed. And it doesn't appear anything has changed because Mr. Trump is playing ad hocism like he does quite a bit.
Well, I think you've pushed open a door that we cover here all the time in the menacing harassment, now criminal investigation from DOJ and the FBI and for Senator Kelly from the Pentagon of the 6 lawmakers who told the men and women of the military never to follow an illegal order. I mean, are you saying, General Hertling, that if they were asked to, I can't even get the words out of my mouth, attack Greenland, that would be an illegal order?
Well, if it were to happen tomorrow, then yes, because Greenland by statute is part of Denmark, which is an allied nation, part of the 32 members of NATO. So you brought up at the top of the show about how it would institute a dynamic within the NATO headquarters where, you know, the key questions of both Article 4 and Article 5 is, do you have to be protected from some type of foreign invasion if you're a member of NATO? And do you come together in Brussels to debate that? So any nation that might be attacked, in this case Denmark, one of their outlying islands, has been attacked. So they would immediately go to NATO headquarters and say, let's invoke those articles that NATO is so famous for. So yeah, it would be illegal, in my view, to do that. Now, I'm not a lawyer or an international affairs guru in terms of the legal implications of something like that. But I got to tell you, Nicole, if I was in command of a large organization and was asked to do that, I certainly would throw the question down. Tom was baiting me a minute ago. He knows to do that very well, saying, where are the rest of the military guys standing up to say this? Well, some of them will stand up, and there have been several that have already retired. You're never going to see the active duty guys say this, but I'm hoping that they are fighting behind the scenes to say, we can't do this. Mr. President, this is wrong. And that's the kind of thing we saw in the first administration when General Milley and General Kelly and Secretary Esper were all telling him he could not do the kinds of things he wanted to do.
Well, and a lot of what Milley and Esper were telling him not to do, he's steamrolled through and done in this second term before the 1-year anniversary since his second inauguration.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. It has been 1 year since Donald Trump took office, and it has been, I think you'd agree, brutal in almost all ways. Masked, armed federal immigration officers looking like they're in the middle of a war zone in camouflage and long guns are subjecting the residents of Minneapolis to a violent and lawless occupation. While the president muses about sending in American soldiers and has his Department of Justice almost by the day go after local elected leaders. The economy is deteriorating, from unemployment to inflation to the tariffs Donald Trump has levied unilaterally, hundreds of billions, maybe trillions of dollars in taxes on the American people, also leaving America even more isolated. The Dow Jones dropped almost 900 points today alone. Just in the past month, Donald Trump has seized and captured the president of Venezuela, brought them to the U.S. to stand trial and announced we are taking their oil and selling it and then putting the proceeds in a private offshore bank account in Qatar that Trump controls. He's also threatened to bomb Iran as well as numerous other countries. In fact, our closest allies in Europe are preparing for a possible war with us because Trump wants somebody to give him Greenland and a Nobel Peace Prize. That obsession and its consequences were on full display today in Davos, Switzerland, as the annual meeting of world leaders became an emergency summit, frantic almost, to deal with an American president who is, not to put too fine a point on it, acting like an evil madman. And they've tried all sorts of strategies up until today, and they're still trying to coddle Trump like a toddler, to flatter him. Now they're facing an ominous fact that has been staring us Americans in the face for a year. The United States is a nuclear-armed superpower run by a would-be tyrant. And they are now talking about him like an enemy.
We need more stability in this world, but we do prefer respect to bullies. We do prefer science to plotism, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
The fact is, Trump only respects force and strength and unity. And that's exactly what Europe should demonstrate right now.
I would like to confirm that they are an ally, but then they have to behave like an ally. You live in a time of monsters, and it's up to him to decide if he wants to be a monster, yes or no.
Let me put this in words you might understand. Mr. President, off.
Things are so dire, the Prime Minister of Canada, our steadfast ally to the north, our neighbor, gave one of the best, most clear-eyed, sober, urgent speeches that I've heard a politician deliver in a very, very long time. And certainly not the usual kind of speech that we hear at places like Davos.
Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. But when we only negotiate bilaterally with a hegemon, we negotiate from weakness. We accept what's offered. We compete with each other to be the most accommodating. This is not sovereignty. It's the performance of sovereignty while accepting subordination. The powerful have their power. But we have something too. The capacity to stop pretending, to name reality, to build our strength at home, and to act together.
The thesis of Carney's speech is that the old order has been destroyed, that it lies in ruins, that this isn't just a transition, but a disruption. And it wasn't just world leaders. Visitors in Davos could see a glow in those snow-capped mountains after the sun set this evening, after a group of 10 local residents hiked up the mountain with 450 torches to spell out one message that shone down across the valley: no kings. Donald Trump is set to speak at Davos tomorrow, but while the rest of the world is describing him as the biggest threat to peace and stability in the world, he was exactly where you would expect him to be, at a White House podium for a very, very long hour and 44 minutes. And I've watched, 6-year-olds play baseball. A very long hour and 44 minutes boasting about his year of accomplishments.
Should have gotten the Nobel Prize for each war, but I don't say that. I say millions and millions of people. And don't let anyone tell you that Norway doesn't control the shots, okay? It's in Norway. Norway controls the shots. And by the way, I did more for NATO than any other person alive or dead. Officially reinstated Columbus Day. I like the name Columbus Day. The Italian people are very happy about it. Remember, when you go to the voting booths, I reinstated Columbus Day. And I said to my mother, Mom, she would be there, always there for me. She said, son, you could be a professional baseball player. I said, thanks, Mom. We have a perfect system right now. We're making a fortune. We've never been stronger.
Do you feel like God is proud of the effort that you've put in?
I do, actually. I think God is very proud of the job I've done. And that includes for religion.
By the way, we saved you from some of those vile stuff he did, more racism heaped on Somali Americans and Somalians. But he did that for 2 hours, while the rest of the world described the United States as a rogue state bent on domination. In fact, the White House staff conveniently typed up and printed out Trump on a big stack of paper sheets to read from that listed his supposed accomplishments. with bullet points like number 243, stripped notorious crackhead and grifter Hunter Biden of his taxpayer-funded Secret Service detail. 245, signed an executive order to end the use of paper straws. How can people not be celebrating the streets? How can he not have a 65% approval rating? All this comes days after Trump announced he was forming a board of peace to basically supplant the United Nations. A board run by him where he plans on charging member states $1 billion to have a permanent seat on the board. Trump has already invited heads of state like Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Benjamin Netanyahu to join, and strong-arm leaders from nations like Hungary and Belarus. Over the weekend, Trump also received a text from the Prime Minister of Norway. You saw him talking about the Norwegians before. He's obsessed with them. He's convinced that the Norwegian president controls the Nobel Peace Prize. And he got a text that was honestly kind of flattering and supplicant, like all of these messages tend to be, desperately seeking to ease tensions with the U.S. over its positions on Greenland, Gaza, and Ukraine. Trump responded by text saying in part, quote, "Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America," going on to insist on taking Greenland. Now, this is an obvious point, and it's been made a ton, but it's worth reiterating today on this one-year anniversary. Us, Americans, electing Donald Trump is not just our problem for us. We have made it the world's problem because we have made ourselves the center of the global order. And the post-World War II global order has been predicated basically on U.S. hegemony. And to be real clear-eyed about this, and there's a lot of gauzy nostalgia here, that hegemony, that power that we have has been abused egregiously in many circumstances, in awful, bloody, and unforgivable ways, from Vietnam to Iraq and beyond. But that hegemony was also the ordering principle, along with a set of international multilateral institutions that were constructed, built on the big lesson of World War II, which is that autocratic regimes, expansionist empires, and fascists will create world war. And so we ended up with a system in which the world's oldest, most stable democracy, one of the victors of that war, was at the center to prevent that. And the best way to understand that structure, that post-war liberal order, is not as some liberal order, but really as a world war avoidance machine. The world war avoidance machine with the U.S. at the center has been running for 80 years now. And it's done a lot of bad things, but it has succeeded in that singular goal. And what we are dealing with today is what happens when the winners of World War II, one of them, realize the order they built is crumbling, and that the global hegemon is sounding and maybe acting now like an Axis power. Maybe we're the bad guys. And these allies are gaining a daunting awareness that Americans in the anti-Trump camp have had from day one. Something that's been clear from the first day that he was sworn in, when he unilaterally pardoned all the January 6th insurrectionists who had stormed the Capitol on his behalf, including the ones that beat the cops on the head and the ones convicted of seditious conspiracy. These allies are becoming aware that the most powerful person in the world is a danger and threat to it and making the world order unstable. And that means we're all in a lot of trouble.
The Justice Department investigation, which initially focused on Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, is expanding. The New York Times reports federal prosecutors have issued subpoenas to at least 5 Democratic officials in Minnesota, beyond Walz and Frey. 2 people familiar with the matter tell the New York Times that prosecutors are seeking documents from the mayor of St. Paul, Kali Hare, the state attorney general, Keith Ellison, and Mary Moriarty, the Hennepin County attorney. Joining us, MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Galanian and former Assistant Chief Counsel for ICE, Veronica Cardenas. This is an extraordinary step, Ken. Explain to me the justification.
The whole thing is absolutely extraordinary, Katie. The theory of this federal investigation, as I understand it from some reporting, is they're looking at whether these local officials have violated a statute that makes it a crime to conspire to obstruct federal officers in the course of their duty. But what we're talking about here is First Amendment protected activity by public officials, elected officials in the state of Minnesota and by various cities, essentially advising their citizens on how to fulfill their civil rights and how to behave if they're confronted by ICE agents, and denouncing what they see as an invasion of their community. You know, before we got on the air, I was watching video of a news conference by a local Minnesota police chief who said that even members of his own department, people of color entirely, he said, are being pulled over by masked ICE agents and who are demanding proof of citizenship, and only when they present their police ID are they allowed to go. These were men with guns drawn. This is happening every day around the country, but particularly in Minnesota, and these local officials are trying to put a stop to it. So we have an incredible clash here between the federal government, the awesome power of the Justice Department and the federal government, and local elected officials in a way that we haven't seen ever in the history of this country, Katie.
But it's also Mary Moriarty and the AG Keith Ellison. And what have they done? I mean, they've announced investigations, but they've also been very careful in how they've framed all of this. I mean, they've asked the public for help. They've asked for more evidence, for more information. It's not just the governor and the mayor here, the mayors of both towns, Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's now the DA and the AG taking it to that step. I mean, isn't that even one step further than the public officials?
Yeah, well, the DOJ is seeking evidence that the actions of these people were designed to obstruct federal immigration enforcement. But of course, the thing to remember here is that this may never reach charges, let alone a trial, but it has an effect of chilling and intimidating people. The awesome power of the federal government, grand jury subpoenas landing on people's offices. We don't even know the extent to which career FBI agents and career prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office are even engaging in this. It doesn't take a lot to send out some subpoenas. And that's an interesting question, is who actually at the Department of Justice is putting their names on an inquiry like this? And is it going to go anywhere, or is it just an intimidation tactic?
Let me show you what Governor Tim Walz said about this. He said 2 days ago it was Alyssa Slotkin. Last week it was Jerome Powell. Before that, Mark Kelly. Weaponizing the justice system and threatening political opponents is a dangerous authoritarian tactic. The only person not being investigated for the shooting of Renee Good is the federal agent who shot her. Here's Mayor Jacob Frey saying this. This is an obvious attempt to intimidate me for standing up for Minneapolis, local law enforcement, and residents against the chaos and danger this administration has brought to our city. I will not be intimidated. My focus remains where it has always been, keeping our city safe. Veronica, the president took to the podium in the White House today, and the first thing he started talking about after he brandished his book of accomplishments, and that's what it was called, his book of accomplishments over the past year, was to start talking about Minneapolis. And he showed up a bunch of mugshots that he said were of violent criminals that were arrested in Minneapolis. We can't confirm anything that the president said. What does it say to you, though, that the president of the United States came to the podium today to try to reframe the discussion on Minneapolis, to try to get ahead of it, and to try to claim that what's going on there is to protect American citizens from these very violent criminals?
It seems to me like he sees the way that the American public is viewing this. This is going to be a stain on our democracy, the way that he's treating non-citizens and citizens alike. And what he's doing is not novel, right? If it's criminals that he's going after, this is not novel. DHS has been doing this. When I was an assistant chief counsel, we did this. We did go after criminals with targeted investigations. What he is doing now is just canvassing entire areas. We heard the story of a U.S. citizen in his house, pulled out without a warrant when he was a citizen all along. And these cases are not the exception anymore. They've become the norm.
Yeah, no, it's a man who was removed from his home in his underwear. An American citizen removed from his home in his underwear. You just heard Ken said, talking about the police source that he was saying, where the Ken, repeat again what you were saying about police officers being pulled over by ICE.
A local police chief had a news conference today and it said that he's getting complaints from all over the community, including from his own officers, people of color, who are getting pulled over by masked ICE agents, guns drawn, demanding to see proof of citizenship, which of course no one has. You have a driver's license, that's not proof of citizenship. And then only when the officer shows their police ID, the ICE agents wordlessly walk away, as the police chief explained it.
So, Veronica, if they wanted to take legal action against the administration for that, could they?
They could, because the stop, the questioning has to be based on either reasonable suspicion and a stop, arrest, probable cause. So in these cases, what we're seeing is that because ICE has enjoyed, or DHS has enjoyed, warrantless arrests for so long, and the Supreme Court has really lowered the standard of what reasonable suspicion is. It can be based on the way a person looks. We've heard DHS state it's because someone spoke in an accent. It can be because they are standing by a Home Depot or maybe a bus stop, and so they think those are characteristics of people who do not have status. But at the same time, they do not have jurisdiction over citizens. So yes, if they are being unlawfully arrested, unlawfully detained, there are actions that they can take against DHS, but it is very difficult.
You know, we were talking a moment ago about the American citizen who was taken from his home by ICE in his underwear. His name is Scott Tao. He was interviewed about it. Let's listen to what he said.
Suddenly they just handcuffed me. They didn't ask for my ID or anything until after they handcuffed me, and then they asked me, do I have my ID? I go, yeah, it's in the room. And then my daughter-in-law, she tried to get my ID, but they didn't want to see it no more. Yeah, they just took me out there with no clothes on, and they just covered with my grandson's blanket.
So a federal judge has gotten involved here and said that ICE has to, respect protesters. It can't just willy-nilly start pepper spraying people. But what about the forcibly going into somebody's home and dragging them out? Has that been addressed? Veronica?
I don't think that has specifically been addressed. I think that whatever side of the aisle you're on, at the very least, we should, accept that the Fourth Amendment protects unreasonable searches and seizures. Unless there's a warrant, there's no reason why any law enforcement official should be going into a home. There's a few exceptions. None of them are present here. And so this is one of those cases where it doesn't really matter what DHS has to say to justify that unlawful entry. That unlawful entry into the home happened. So there should be a recourse there. And the issue, too, with these cases is that Americans are being treated the same way or even worse than people who have committed violent crimes. Like we heard from testimony from arrests happening in Minneapolis. A woman who was a U.S. citizen stated that she was chained by the legs, chained by the arms to her waist, denied water, put in a cell for hours until DHS could verify her citizenship. And so this isn't just about, breaking and entering into somebody's home to unlawfully arrest them, but then all the treatment that comes after that.
All right, Veronica Cardenas, Ken Dilanian, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We begin with a measurable fact in America right now. Things are not okay. Troops in the streets, federal agents killing in broad daylight, President Trump openly defying laws, DOJ abusing powers against his enemies list as Trump pockets hundreds of millions, stoking questions about whether he's acting for the public, himself, or some purchased foreign agenda. This is the State of the Union as the U.S. marks over 1 year since Trump was sworn back in. This is a time to assess the president's policies in a typical era. But this is no typical era. So tonight, our special report is on how America's bedrock guardrails are holding up. First, in government and among the wider public. How the government checks are doing and how the American people are meeting the challenge. Now, Trump's rushed, rule-busting governing can actually overwhelm the system, making it harder to even see what's happening over this past year or where his plots worked or failed. So this new report tracks each key guardrail. And I'm going to walk you through this. Some guardrails are holding up, marked green, like lawsuits. Some are a mixed bag, a mixed record, like how we can measure the police military complex trying to patrol us at home. That's yellow, for example, and others are failing, like the DOJ, clearly marked red. Now, for our democracy, if you see the glass half empty, you'll notice some of the red. Others may find encouragement in the green. But I want to share one more truth before we dig into this special report tonight. Donald Trump tries to scramble any limits on power with spectacle, shock, and awe, a playbook to instill fear or hopelessness or both, so that giving in is pitched as some sort of inevitable next step. Reality actually shows the opposite, people standing up, fighting and winning even against lying, cheating, violence, and that convicted sedition, and against a political figure who, remember, got fewer votes in 2 of his 3 elections, lost the midterms last time, loses in the courts a lot, and was the first president ever indicted, along with 8 of his aides getting convicted.
President Trump acknowledging that Joe Biden will be president.
For the first time in U.S. history, a former president is facing federal criminal charges.
But did not take responsibility for the mob of his supporters who breached the Capitol.
President Trump taking the oath of office for the second time in the Capitol Rotunda.
More than 1,500 pardons or commutations in all for the people who violently stormed the U.S. Capitol.
President Trump says nearly every federal agency in the U.S. government could fall under the scrutiny of Elon Musk.
Jimmy Kimmel back on air overnight.
The hard work of improving New Yorkers' lives starts now.
This is the most American thing that you can do. Protest and speak for what you believe in.
Those are the stakes. Our report now begins with government guardrails. The founders were most concerned that the new democracy could be hijacked by a wannabe king. And they made checks inside the executive, staff bound by the Constitution, not a politician's whims. Officials must resist orders that break the law. And the epicenter for that is DOJ, which did patrol Trump in his first term, even appointing special counsel Mueller because Trump's team could not investigate itself. Now the DOJ is failing that independence this term. Some officials have resisted orders to lie in court or abuse power against Trump's enemies, even resigning, but the line hasn't held. Trump's former personal lawyers, Bondi and Blanche, run the DOJ like Trump's political machine, probing rivals in cases so weak, several dropped long before trial. New plots against the Fed chair this month, new probes of Minnesota Democrats added to this chart breaking today, and even 1 or 2 questionable cases of illegal selective prosecution. That's bad. But right now, it's 14 such cases. The very enemies list Bondi disclaimed under oath. So our reporting finds the DOJ's internal guardrail is failing. The red you see here. Trump doing in 1 year this term what he never did in his first 4 years, breaking the DOJ into an unlawful arm of his agenda. And as Russia and countless autocracies show, if the government can get away with indicting anyone for nothing, then you don't have a full opposition or a full democracy. Then there's the use of soldiers and militarized policing on American soil. Trump seizing National Guards without their governors, deploying ICE agents in places that voted against him, leading to escalation, to violence, and the ICE agent killing Renee Good. Now, judges have slowly trimmed some of those deployments. But remember, the founders devoted the Third Amendment to stop soldiers from being forced onto citizens. Federal law bars the military from policing at home. And yet the military has been deployed in 6 cities and counting. This guardrail is clearly faltering, and Trump's floating even broader emergency powers, or the Insurrection Act. Now, the courts are the ultimate authority in our system. They limit politicians' power. They resolve what the law says. They're the last word on elections. And I want to show you, if you really measure it, the court's record this past year is mixed. They've tangled with DOJ lawyers. They've clearly ruled against some of Trump's lawless moves. We count about 13 major rulings against him. But the Supreme Court has also allowed, even rewarded, Trump ploys to evade the law or run out the clock. And so that's a measure there. Then you have something we all remember. Judges are just on the receiving end. But the doors to the courthouse right now are still open and working. There's been a flood of lawsuits against Trump actions in year 1. And if you count up and actually look at this, something he may want to distract you from, about half have won steps to slow or block unlawful acts, with many still pending. Those 358 major suits are seen across the country, part of the many losses Trump has been dealt this first year. In fact, so many losses, it's hard to remember them all.
We removed the public safety threat, gang member, designated terrorist.
The Supreme Court says the Trump administration must facilitate the return of a Maryland man deported to a Salvadorian prison.
The government admitted it mistakenly deported him.
Elon Musk's time in the White House has officially come to an end.
This feels like a reality show character being kind of slowly written off.
I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way.
Jimmy Kimmel back on air overnight.
Anyway, as I was saying before I was interrupted.
This is not partisan. We're asking for you to stand with us now to release all of the files.
It's never been political for us.
2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed.
Donald Trump put his surrender and humiliation in writing in capital letters in a tweet saying, "I have just signed the bill to release the Epstein files."
There is no legal, factual, or moral justification for President Trump to deploy any military troops or National Guard units here in Chicago.
The Supreme Court blocked the Trump administration from deploying the National Guard in Illinois.
A lot of those losses from the lawsuits. That guardrail is working. Now, the founders also predicted that ambition would check ambition. And this isn't one you even need a chart for. That has not been the case in this Republican Congress. Infamously meek. Republicans don't even defend their own elected congressional power, let alone checking the president for seizing tariff and foreign policy powers or doing anything about one of the biggest stories of this past year, his corrupt and dangerous grifting, which breaks the Constitution's ban on foreign gifts, taking a jet from a foreign country, hundreds of millions in crypto. It dwarfs all White House corruption scandals. And so as we mark this year in the guardrails, let's be clear, it's one of the greatest violations of U.S. government guardrails ever.
His family's expanding business interests in the Middle East are facing fresh scrutiny.
Blurring the lines between business and government.
The Trump Organization has plans for luxury skyscrapers, golf courses, and a deal involving cryptocurrency.
My goodness me. $5 billion?
Eye-popping numbers.
President Trump preparing to accept a luxury jet from the royal family of Qatar.
The jet is just the latest in a series of actions taken by the president that flout ethics norms.
It's crypto-friendly legislation coming from the president of the United States, who is in turn cashing in on the crypto phase. Personally, his family.
The single largest corrupt gift in the history of gifts.
Facts. Patrolling a president's self-enrichment and violating the Constitution, that's up to Congress. And Republicans have completely failed. They didn't even join a plan to just block your taxpayer dollars from being used to upgrade what is now Donald Trump's personal jet gift. It's one of several examples where the GOP Congress just fails as a guardrail. By contrast, many states are stepping up. They're using their powers to resist those deployments. They take the administration to court in legal ways that not everyone can do. They're using state mechanisms. In fact, we count 23 major suits from the states. This is the Constitution's federalism. This guardrail is working, and states also protect elections. And that brings us, of course, to the people's checks on Trump, which is actually an area very interesting that, according to the numbers, is working better. Now, we documented government checks and balances, many faltering that you see in red and yellow. Now we turn to the other check provided under the Constitution, the American people's rights, where free speech, protests, and democracy are holding up better, including with the work by citizens as opposed to many elites, with one exception. CEOs have an outsized role in economics, media, and democracy. They can use their power to hold the line. We see that in wartime patriotism or peacetime government collaboration, and sometimes in backing civil rights and democracy. Some CEOs responded to the original January 6th attack by denouncing it and vowing not to donate to politicians involved. Once Trump came back, though, many reversed themselves, donating to him. This includes some of America's largest company CEOs, and the backtracking contrast is striking.
Mark Zuckerberg just writing in a statement that the shocking events of the last 24 hours clearly demonstrate that President Donald Trump intends to use his remaining time in office to undermine the peaceful and lawful transition of power.
Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon said, "For years, our democracy has built a reservoir of goodwill around the world that brings important benefits for our citizens. Today's attack on the U.S. Capitol does further damage."
Indeed, those big companies, 12 of their CEOs were once standing up to this. We showed you some of that sound. Now they're actively undercutting the red line they claimed for democracy. Other CEOs have buckled under government pressure to suspend Jimmy Kimmel or pay Trump for baseless cases that attack speech. This includes CEOs who, as part of their portfolio, also oversee news companies. And then there are the lawyers. Trump plotted against the Sixth Amendment right to counsel by retaliating against firms representing his critics. Now, law firms fight in court for a living, yet early on, many buckled under that plot. About 38% of the targeted firms have been fighting back over time in court, a mixed picture at best. Now, Trump also tried abusing government funding to attack campus freedom. And while many people criticize the universities which buckled, and that got a lot of attention, when you look over the year, our reporting finds most targeted universities, about 60%, just there, about 57%, are fighting back. Now, some of the parent companies' CEOs buckled. I mentioned that. But when you look at the actual editors of newspapers, say the Times, Wall Street Journal, and most working journalists, they're not buckling, even as Trump sues and tries to bar access, and recently even oversaw the unusual federal search of a reporter's home. Journalists are still reporting and speaking and critiquing the government as the Constitution envisioned. In fact, if you just think about it, a lot of what we know about Trump attacking the Bill of Rights comes from the exercise of that very first right, the First Amendment right to report and speak. It bars the government, of course, from any attempt to censor, ban, or punish free speech, free press, or the right of the people to peacefully assemble, which brings us to protest. Americans have been exercising that right to great effect, breaking records for protests in this past year against Trump's autocratic bid for king-like powers, really sparking a movement that is now, according to polling, 13% larger than MAGA.
Protest now or bow down later.
Those are your options?
Yes.
Everything this regime has been up to is anti-American.
More than 100 community members rally around a Vermont man at risk of deportation.
Like I say, this is where I belong. This is home to me.
Congress makes the laws, not the president.
I believe in the Constitution, the rule of law, and I believe in people treating other people with humanity.
I didn't think that our government would be inhumane like that.
It is regular Americans who have been fighting against Trump all over the country. Yes, in Washington, but honestly, all over the country. And that's what's made the difference.
These protests all over the country are one of the most effective green ratings when you measure the guardrails of this past year. Comparison, the Conservative Tea Party got a lot of attention and drew about 700,000 attendees concerned about Obama's leadership across 2009. The past year's Trump protests have drawn about 13 million people. A massive show of public resistance and unity. And that can shape public opinion and impact politicians alike. Now, I told you DOJ employees falling down on their constitutional oath. We reported that. The U.S. guardrails also require regular citizens at the beginning and the end of every major prosecution. The grand juries that charge, and of course, the jury of 12 that convicts. And so the DOJ's extreme cases are sometimes dead on arrival because citizens on grand juries keep rejecting cases against protesters, against some Trump rivals. They've stopped now, if you're counting, 10 attempted cases that we know about from Bondi's DOJ, including the bungled case against New York Attorney General James. Then there are elections. Trump now muses about an illegal third term or plotting against the midterms. Those are threats to do crime. They got to be taken seriously, especially after his convicted 2020 insurrection. But the fact is, this year, elections were still successfully held around the nation. That is another green rating. Democracy's core guardrail, the people decide, is holding under strain. So, altogether, it is a rough year for the rule of law. We're seeing red on the government side. Trump, the source of the attacks on the rule of law, his appointees, Congress, all failing the Constitution. That's as courts and states try to hold the line. But the evidence shows the public is leading in this breach, and you can measure it. Regular workers showing courage their bosses lack. Journalists reporting amid these attacks. Citizens defending a Constitution that the DOJ is clearly trashing. From the jury box to the ballot box, and those record-breaking protests month after month, even against very real threats of government retribution or violence as soldiers roam the streets. And this is actually what the founders envisioned. Strong checks and rights, because they expected conniving tyrants can come into power. The rights protected because we will need them, not because everything's just going to be easy or okay. Things are not okay. The rule of law is losing key rounds. The founders planned for that. Madison was fixated on how to systematically thwart future tyrants who might come into office. Or as the late Bashar Jackson said, a.k.a. Pop Smoke, drop a slip and get a light pack. I don't care if you're losing. Still fight back. The people are fighting back. And that's partly because we still have that power because the guardrails are protecting it most of the time. And the American system makes it a stronger power than any temporary politician who's supposed to serve the public.